Everyone's muted on entry, correct?
Actually, no, but I can mute everybody as we need to. So, yeah. Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're just going to give it another minute or two before we formally start, just to let people continue joining. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. So I just wanted to say a quick warm welcome. I'm Deb McNamara with 350 Colorado, and tonight's event has been planned by a group of volunteers on our Renewable Energy Committee. And I just want to say a huge thanks to those people who have been planning for the last 6 weeks or so, getting this event ready. And I want to just give a super warm welcome, not only to our panelists who Phoebe is going to introduce in a moment, but I want to give a super warm welcome to Phoebe Dominguez. And Phoebe, you can just wave right now. So Phoebe is a youth climate leader, and she is a member of our Renewable Energy Committee. And she has just taken a lead here and is going to MC and moderate our event tonight. So I just wanted to say a super special thank you to Phoebe for being one of our youth leaders in this movement and for being part of just bringing this vision to reality for this event. So thank you. And Phoebe, I'll hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. I can definitely say that you were not wasting your time. I would just like to give a warm welcome to everyone who is here and all of our amazing panelists. My name is Phoebe. I'm a climate youth activist here in Colorado. You may know me because I spoke at the Nobody Left Behind, Just Transition Now rally in June. I was also the Climate Hero of the Month for the 350 Colorado newsletter in July. I would just like to say a few words on why this is very important to me. I am growing up in Colorado. I've lived in Colorado my entire life, and I love it here. I want future generations to see Colorado and experience like I have. We have always believed that our leaders and the people we look up to have always treat us right, and we have always listened to them and trusted them to live their lives as our leaders. We have realized that when climate change came along, we realized that our whole system was off. We realized that we were doing everything wrong, and we realized that we needed to change everything. I personally am terrified of climate change, and I became a climate activist because I wanted to have a life. I wanted to have a future, and I wanted everyone else to too. We have been asking everyone to realize that this is a matter of life and death. We have been fighting for this for many, many, many years. We have been asking people and screaming about this. This is important to me because I want future generations, me and my children, to have a chance. I want them to look around and see lark buntings. I want them to see blue spruces. I want them to see mountain goats. I want them to look around at the beauties of Colorado, and I know that we can lead this movement. And this is why renewable energy is one of the main things that we need to change. So thank you for coming. Justice is so important to all of us, especially right now. What are we talking about today? We are talking about how can we further energy justice and a rapid shift to renewable energy in Colorado. We have invited panelists this evening to a rapid further discuss this and how renewable energy can play a key role in creating a just and sustainable economy. I will be sharing the schedule for this evening. We will be hearing from several panelists, followed by questions, and you are welcome to put any questions in the chat that you may have. around this event, and we will do our best to try to answer the ones that we can. These are a list of our panelists. First, we will have Marie Venner of Together Colorado. We will discuss what is underway with Xcel Energy and the next step needed to press forward and encouraging renewable energy in the utilities sector. She will also discuss air quality and the negative health impacts related to the current dispenses on natural gas and how the transition to renewable energy will serve those who are disproportionately impacted. Next, we will have Catherine Greener, founder of Greener Solutions, Inc. We'll discuss the work in the governor's office that is underway promoting a regenerative recovery plan focused on the renewable energy solutions. Chaz Tiplin and Courtney Fieldman of Rocky Mountain Institute will discuss the equitable benefits of decarbonizing systems and how this impacts health, economic, and climate aspects of a potential ways of moving forward. First, we'll hear from Marie Venner. Marie Venner is a frequent presenter of the National Academy's Transportation Research Board, where she organized decarbonization series. She chaired climate change solution subcommittees, currently in the chair's movement, environmentally maintenance, and has worked on multiple EU Horizon 2020 research projects. She also has spoken to Global Ethics based in Switzerland and Climate Reality Project on recent researches finding the health benefits of air pollution. She is a mom and a near lifelong Coloradan and an aged family on one side. So take it away, Marie Venner.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and try to share screen here then. Did that work?
Yep, Marie, it looks like it's coming on.
Okay, great. So that's, I'm from an ag family on one side, and since we are all, we were kind of convened by 350 this evening, are you guys getting a big echo?
Yeah, if you could use one of the computers, that would be great.
Geez, I haven't actually had, is it still?
I think it's coming from whoever is logged in as DA. If you can mute yourself, that would be great.
Okay, perfect.
Oh, thanks for the help. Okay, great. All right. So since we are here from 350 tonight, and are you guys seeing the Zoom screen in the middle of it, or are we good? Okay. Well, at any rate, I first just wanted to share this about the Dust Bowl, since I am from an ag family on one side. I have a daughter in high school, and I was interested to see that her human geography chapter called the U.S. Midwest and West the abundant land. But NASA has said this past decade that we are creating a permanent Dust Bowl in Colorado. And it just makes me think, what would my ancestors say? And what will our kids say if we do that? And you know, as you can see from the map here, this is NASA's projection. 80% chance of this on the current path we're on, and we heard this spring even that we're already 20 years into it, so it's definitely happening. And you can see that the drought extends from the Central Valley in California really into the Midwest, you know, to Kansas, and Colorado's completely brown. Right in the middle there, and you can see what we're already doing to Central America further south. So a lot of the food surplus in the world still comes from the U.S. So we're really messing with some serious stuff here, and that's just a context for what I'll get into about air quality, which will be the main thing I'm focusing on this evening. Little bit of everything, because we're talking about doing a series of webinars. Okay, so for many years, we didn't worry too much about air quality because we thought, well, we can handle a bit of it, and what can you do about it anyway? But the thing is that there's a lot that can be done about it now. It can be quite different. Things can be a lot better. And the air quality regulation has so many benefits. I started taking a look at this a couple years ago when I was noticing, just from following Science Daily, that there's been an explosion of medical research since 2010. And my friend Jim Crooks at National Jewish, who I'm kind of subbing for tonight, he verified that actually all of the research that's beyond respiratory and cardiology has all been since 2010. Isn't that amazing that that has occurred so recently in our lifetime? So, for years before that, there was all sorts of research. It was pretty well known that air pollution contributed to strokes and cardiac disease. Those two together are about half of deaths. And it also contributes to lung disease and asthma, of course. But in the last decade, we've found that it contributes to literally just about every other form of disease, and that is because of inflammation. Basically, our bodies are not set up to respond to air pollution from all these millennia, 200,000 years, that humans have been evolving. Our bodies are set up to respond to infections, and so when we are exposed to air pollution, our bodies are responding like it could be an infection, and it's boosting our inflammation. But the big takeaway tonight is that clean air is possible, and it's practical, and it's affordable, and it's of course what we want. It's what everybody wants when they learn about the risk to our health, our cognition, our kids. And all of these fossil fuel emissions cause cancer and ill health and anxiety and depression and basically mortality. It takes an average of 3 years off of everybody's life. And the people who it really hits and actually kills them, it's more about 10 years earlier for them. So this is a really huge deal, especially because there's something we can do about it. And I've dropped in the chat a couple links that can help you take a look at that. So a response that we sometimes get is that, maybe air pollution isn't all that bad. And maybe what's in it, we hear US is better than other places. So should we not worry about it? And that's exactly wrong, because actually it increases linearly. They can see effects at even below EPA safe levels. And then it increased air pollution is increased mortality and all of these diseases. It's really a global killer. Outdoor air pollution is a leading cause of all deaths from cancer, and non-communicable diseases were 68% of all deaths globally in 2012. This has been going up along with air pollution, basically. So we've got, cardiovascular disease and chronic lung diseases, and then, what they weren't counting earlier in these cost-benefit analyses are like the cancers and diabetes. And I'm so sorry, I've got the wrong presentation here. But I was going to just tell you about, I'll skip ahead. So lifetime exposure and even minuscule increases in small particles increase deaths. And this particular slide shows this is a lot of different studies. So it shows how much more the daily mortality increases as these other things increases. So we can see that the change in daily mortality is, it increases by twice as much for cardiovascular disease for every 10 micrograms per meter squared. And I also wanted to show you how much even CO2, which is not really considered, I mean, it's not a toxic pollutant like so many of these others, but as it increases, it actually inhibits our ability to think clearly. And any of you who have seen Apollo 13 years ago, it was all about that, basically increasing CO2 concentration. So there's many aspects of being able to think clearly, whether it's task orientation or crisis response, or our ability to use information, our ability to strategize. All of these things go down the more CO2 concentration we have, which is always greater indoors. Allergens are worse. There are so many different areas that are worse, and we will get into some of these in a future one. But I just wanted to also share a little bit about Excel, because, and that's in the chat for you here. But Excel, what our situation with Excel is now is Excel is the last utility in Colorado that will be closing coal plants. So they're the only ones that are planning on operating coal plants now past 2030. But if Colorado is going to meet our climate goals for 2025, we are going to need Excel in particular to really step up a lot more and probably close their coal plants by 2025. So a number of us are working on that. We have a large coalition, and we hope you'll join in as well. There was also an important bill that Edie Hooten in Boulder tried to run last year, and that wasn't really accepted in the COVID session, but it will run again next spring, and that's for community choice energy, which begins to help us get out of the monopoly situation that we have with Excel. And that's all. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marie. I would like to thank you personally and thank you for all the work you're doing. Next, we have Catherine Greener. Catherine Greener has a significant experience in the implications of sustainability, lean manufacturing, and industrial quality management systems. She has given numerous talks, facility visioning sessions, developed sustainability strategies, implemented organization-wide employee engagement programs, and provided many sustainability leadership for her clients. She holds a BS in Industrial Engineering from Northwestern University and an MBA from the University of Michigan, and currently sits on the board of the Alliance Center Co-EcoCycle and B-Cycle. Thank you so much, and take it away.
Thanks, Phoebe. So Marie, you said something in your presentation that I wrote down, and it has that the more that CO2 levels rise, then no longer can you think clearly. And I said, so that is our administration's problem right now, right there. We solve climate change and a lot of our other problems go away. So thanks, that was something that I've been thinking about, and you just solved that for me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Alliance Center's Emergent Series. And just a point of clarification, we're not working for the governor. We are working to advise the current administration on policies and programs and tactics for this. And we have had one session with the governor, and we're hoping to have a much longer session now in September when we wrote the final report. So I'm just going to talk a little bit and then share some results from all 6 of our sessions. And I see that Micah is on the participants list, and she was in several of our sessions. So I'll be, hopefully if I can jump in when I say this. So I was lucky enough to not only be on the board, but to be the primary facilitator for the Alliance Center's Emergence Series. If you're familiar with the Alliance Center being the physical location in Denver, we're also a convener. And when we couldn't have actually convening in person, we took a big pivot. And it's really through the Alliance Center's Climate and Democracy program that we run this Emergence Series. And we just finished up the last one last week, which seems like a year ago already. But during this crisis, immediately, when we saw the broken and fragile systems, almost immediately with the crisis, we said, we've got an opportunity, perhaps the most powerful opportunity of our generation, to not return to normal, because normal, we realized, sucked for a lot of things and for a lot of people. Hopefully I didn't offend anyone by saying that. So in normal, the economy worked for, we wanted an economy that worked not just for the few. We wanted to see a normal where the environment is protected while jobs are created, and that democracy is at its strongest and communities can thrive. And so in this moment in time, this wormhole, I've called it, an inflection point, we saw, as I said, the broken, fragile systems, but we also saw these areas of opportunity. And so we picked 5 focus areas, and any good list is in priority order. So we started with, the first session was around climate and energy. The second session was around regenerative agriculture and food systems. The third is democracy. The fourth was economic and workforce development. The fifth being natural and built infrastructure and transportation. And lastly was the last session with the synthesis, or transformational change, or simply it's time to just get her done, get it financed. And even though that there were these distinct pillars of work that came out, we saw things that ran through every session. I'm scared to do screen shares, but I may do in a minute. Or I can send this out to the participants. So we called them like gears that had to be in everything and from a transformative, regenerative recovery. The first was committing to equity, diversity, and inclusion. That if we're going to have a just transition, that we have to start there. Strengthening our democratic institutions. And then there was this other undercurrent, and I think it's really important for renewable energy because it's been so politicized, is this narrative. When you look at an electron, it has no political affiliation. It has an affinity, but we won't get into that. But it doesn't have a political affiliation, and yet renewable, it's too green, it's too liberal speak. So what is this narrative that works for all, that you can have on both sides of the aisle? And then we had prioritized the decentralized and local solutions. And you can take each one of these and then think about it from a renewable energy. So there were a couple things, and I can talk through what we call the big ideas, but the first one we focused on is transitioning urgently to renewable energy. And we'll have a chance to talk more about that. But that's key, and the electrification of not just the generation side, but looking at the electrification of homes, looking at the electrification of our transportation system, and then how do you use existing infrastructure to move forward? And I'll have a chance to talk probably more in the panel, but with renewable energy, we focus a lot on the generation side. And because I'll transition over to my fellow panelists at RMI, because the best energy is the energy you don't ever use. So we'll talk a little bit more later.
Thank you so much. Next, we will hear from Courtney Fieldman and Charles Tiplin. Dr. Charles Tiplin is a manager at the Rocky Mountain Institute Electricity Practice. CHAS studies resilient, clean, and cost-effective solutions that can modernize how we and the United States generates and delivers electricity. His work includes quantitative modeling and stakeholder facilitation. He works on clean energy economics, regional decarbonization planning, transmissioning, and grid modernization, and co-authored RMI recent report, The Growing Market for Clean Energy Portfolios. Courtney Fieldman is an associate at the Rocky Mountain Institute, building electrification program primarily focused on accessing the potential legal and climate policies, pathway, and available shift to climate discourses and mobilization action. She has worked in the United Nations Framework for Climate Change data analysis team. Currently, Courtney is focused on a sector specifying interventions and helping cities and United States implement electrification strategies for end-of-use systems, as well as critically focus on creating a decarbonized federal stimulus recommending in the wake of COVID crisis. Thank you, and take it away.
Great, thanks Phoebe. This is Chaz Tiplin. Courtney and I will be trading off here. Briefly, we're gonna talk a little bit about both equity and what it takes for emissions reductions and what Colorado, what's Colorado's place, within the U.S. context. So go ahead and flip us to the next slide, Courtney. Great, yeah, so the big picture, what does it take to be on track for what the IPCC says we need to be doing in order to reduce emissions, in order to be on track for 1.5C, which would help to alleviate at least some of the risks. Oh, not so fast. So what does it take to actually be on track in the United States? Well, basically what the way the climate science works is we can only emit so much CO2 or we heat up the planet too much. And it doesn't really matter when we do it because the CO2 stays in the atmosphere forever. So what's the number for the United States? Well, it's a complex ethical question to ask how much the United States gets to emit as a fraction of the rest of the world, but it's something like 55 gigatons of CO2. And so to put that into context, we can look at that in two ways, and that's what we're showing on this chart. So the first is, how much does the US emit from each fuel? And that's shown on the right. So right now we emit about 6 gigatons a year, and most of that comes from burning oil in our cars predominantly, fossil gas in our electricity and in our buildings, and coal also for electricity. There's also some other emissions from agriculture and industrial processes. The good news is our forests, which we do have a fair amount of here in Colorado, sequester a fair amount of carbon dioxide, and that's about 1 gigaton a year. So we emit 6, our forests take care of 1, so we're a net of about 5. So that means we have 11 years, if you do the math, at the current rate, and we would fill up our entire bucket and it would go poorly for us. You can also divide up the emissions by sector. So this is again US-wide. You can see that electricity is a big chunk, transportation is a big chunk, buildings and industry there, that's like sort of our businesses and homes and our industrial processes. So that's basically the physical infrastructure, like where we burn things directly in our homes and businesses. And then there's other non-energy emissions that we won't talk about as much today. So that's the challenge ahead of us, is how do we take these emissions down to 0, or maybe down to closer to 1, so that our forest is sequestering everything that we're emitting. And we better do it fast, because we only have 55 gigatons of space left in our carbon budget, and we've already emitted 550 gigatons just in the US. Okay, next slide, Courtney. Great, so in summary, the situation is dire. So if you look at global emissions and how much we can emit before things are sort of beyond what we want for 1.5C, we sort of have 10 years to get things under control. If we keep going 10 years, the existing rate, things are looking pretty poor. Next slide. Okay, so you know, climate hawks, you know, folks like many of us on this call, we've been sounding this alarm for 20 years, and I've presented some dire math. But I'm also here to give us hope. This time I think it's different, right? And what's different now? Well, we have 5 key technologies that are finally ready and cost effective. You know, since Al Gore, many of us probably watched An Inconvenient Truth 20 years ago. The truth was that there was a lot we could do then, but the technologies we needed were not ready. And as someone who was working on those technologies, I knew how not ready they were. But that's not true anymore. Wind and solar are now the cheapest sources of electricity. Batteries are still getting cheaper, but already ready to help us in our vehicles and on the grid to store wind and solar when it's not, for times when it's not windy or sunny. Electric vehicles, you know, we can argue about them or not, but Elon Musk has made a lot of progress here, right? They're similar in cost to gas-powered vehicles, and they will soon be cheaper to operate on a per mile basis. And then lastly, the one that not many people know about, but plays a key role, we need to stop burning gas in our homes to heat them. And Courtney's gonna go more into that. We need to use electricity for those, and that would be heat pumps. Next slide. But the economics alone are not enough. This is one of my favorite tweets, you know, because the reason the economics are not enough is that there's a lot of people that benefit from the current system. And even if they didn't and weren't fighting tooth and nail to keep that current system in place, like the economics take time it takes time to replace all of the old equipment that we have, right? And so the status quo bias that Dave Roberts is referencing here is extremely strong. It's going to take a ton of, even if it's cheaper or just as feasible, it's extremely difficult to overcome the status quo bias. So next slide. Okay, so that was the US context. Let's talk about Colorado. Colorado looks similar. This is the emissions. This chart shows the emissions that are in Colorado. And you can see again, electricity, we use still too much coal here, as Marie was talking about, although that's changing. That coal is getting retired very quickly because renewables and gas are cheaper. But we also use a lot of oil and gas in our buildings and transportation and industrial sectors. The dash lines out to 2050 and 2040, those are the targets set by recent Colorado legislation. And right now, the state is actually exploring different, what they call decarbonization pathways that explore how the state can do that at least cost. Lots of similar studies, including by RMI, have been done in the past, and they all come up with broadly the same answer, which is we need to electrify everything, and we need to clean up the grid so that the electricity supply is mostly clean. So the initial outcomes from the work being done by the firm E3 that's working with the state, and you can, that link isn't live, but if you Google Clean Energy Colorado Energy Office and Roadmap, you will find the webpage with all of the reports. And I recommend that everybody go and look at those because there's a lot of useful things there. But the initial outcomes are in transport, we need to not be buying gas cars anymore. We need to transition to EV as fast as we possibly can. In buildings, industry, similarly, we need to electrify. We need to rapidly replace fossil gas furnaces with heat pumps. The oil and gas sector is going to be a challenge in Colorado. It leaks a lot of methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. And obviously those fuels, we just need to stop burning them. And then in electricity, we need to build so much wind and storage and solar, wind, solar, and storage. And this is more than is going to fit on our roofs. We did a study in New Jersey. In order for New Jersey to meet a significant fraction of its electricity from solar, it was 10 solar panels for every woman, man, and child in New Jersey. It would be even more in Colorado because we're kind of energy hogs in our state, because we have sparsely populated space and we tend to drive a lot and use a lot of energy. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney to talk a little bit more about building electrification.
Great, thanks, Chaz. So Chaz has done a really great job of kind of providing this overview and general outlook of what this transition is going to take. We know that we need to start decarbonizing now, and we have about 10 years to do that to be on track and on 1.5 pathways. So if we take a look at Colorado and we start deep diving into what it's going to take for one sector like buildings and how we break apart that problem, right now, Colorado is not on track in actually meeting the targets it set out. So we definitely need to kind of electrify now. We need to make a push into that. But also as some context, you know, natural gas is the primary fuel that's used in buildings. And that's why we're so concerned with it. And it's imperative to actually meeting those targets that we start taking a look at how to actually electrify buildings as a result. So the next 1 to 5 years are a really critical window to start facilitating this transition away from gas and creating a model that's really centered on the needs of our workers and our community for, you know, environmental justice. If we start to kind of break down what that actually looks like, you'll start seeing it in 2 primary areas. So new construction and then existing construction. So for new construction, we need to stop expanding the gas system and start focusing on how we can actually start electrifying that, ideally by 2025. This could be through net zero building codes, local ordinances promoting electric new construction, any type of policy. And then for existing construction, we really need to kind of ensure that gas appliances are replaced with energy efficient electric appliances. Given the rate of turnover, these appliances normally last 10 to 30 years. So we really need to start switching now. And we need to kind of avoid switching our fuel sources to like from natural gas to what is called renewable natural gas. That is actually not scalable, it's very expensive, and actually need to make the transition directly to electrification already. So we can do that through kind of greenhouse gas performance benchmarking or using energy efficient appliances. Now, cross-cutting all of this is really kind of taking into account our communities. Despite the fact that a lot of us have a desire for clean and energy efficient homes, a lot of times there's a lot of price barriers that get in the way of that. And also we know that, you know, a lot of our communities from these impacts are much more vulnerable to the effects of air pollution that Marie spoke to earlier, and that they face actually a higher cost as a result of these. So we really need to kind of start like focusing how we can actually start integrating them into the problem and start taking a look systemically at how we create like a resilient future that's also more equitable. Now, what's the benefit of actually starting to switch to electrification? Automatically, we start seeing that electric appliances are actually more efficient than gas appliances by almost 3 to 5 times. And as a result, you can start reducing your emissions automatically. And that could save us about 20% of emissions annually as we start trying to kind of fix the problem. Now, the health impacts, we spend about 70% of our livelihoods indoors. I don't even think we realize how much we spend indoors all the time. But gas appliances like gas stoves actually are causing NOx emissions that are leading to about 28,000 premature deaths per year. And these are almost 7 times more NOx emissions than gas power plants, causing illnesses like asthma, lung cancer, and respiratory diseases. On top of that, if we look at kind of the benefits in terms of equity and affordability, gas infrastructure is about 80% of what consumers pay for in terms of gas bills. And if we start looking at the transition away from gas and into electrification, that could become more expensive. It could pose more risks as we start transitioning, and we need to start thinking about how we can keep costs down and give everyone equal access to products as they emerge. But in terms of actual construction, when we look at the cost of new housing construction, we can start saving almost $6,000 per house and maybe $1,500 for multifamily units as we start to install electrification, because we're avoiding the lengthy process of gas pipeline permitting and installation. This can also have other impacts like lowering utility bills. Right now, we're spending around 20 to 30% of our income on home energy bills, and we face a lot of energy insecurity from the potential disconnects. And we'll kind of highlight that a little bit as we're seeing it with COVID, since it's really been exacerbated right now. But as a result, you can start seeing a lot of utility savings from taking these measures, which ultimately starts protecting ratepayers from rising gas rates. And then finally, as we start to kind of look at what this market could be, as we start to kind of imagine the future of this system, there's a lot of new job opportunities that can arise from this. So projections have shown almost 70,000 new jobs could be created in construction, HVAC installation, electrical work, and energy efficiency programs in general. Now, COVID has presented us with kind of like a very unique and unprecedented shock to the system. And I'm trying not to be a downer here with all of these things, but I think it's really important that we recognize the moment that we are in, because as we kind of start trying to understand where we should start making investments, we need to kind of eliminate this concern necessarily from just focusing on kind of the short-term paying back, because we pose the risk of kind of creating stranded assets or carbon lock-in if we actually just kind of use the money to put back in fossil fuels, whereas we could use that to kind of create new economic and resilient sectors. So there's a potential to actually nationally create 2.8 million jobs through building retrofits. You could start seeing almost $148 billion coming back to consumers in terms of energy savings, and 62 million American lives touched through kind of better health measures, through the coupling of kind of taking away emissions as a whole. So as we kind of look at this problem, I think it's really important to recognize where are potential opportunities with what we're looking at right now to unlock new economic and environmental benefits in the future, as we kind of start working through this interesting time that we are all in. So I think that is it from my, oh, sorry, and Chaz, one more.
Right, thanks, Courtney. You forgot my last favorite slide here. Like, so what should we be doing now? And I've noticed a lot of comments in the chat about, you know, the utilities and the electricity system. And yeah, the electricity system needs to clean up. We need to deploy as much wind and solar as we can. But even if we transitioned the grid to zero overnight, we'd still have 3/4 of the problem left over. We absolutely must begin electrification in buildings ASAP. And we need to transition to electric vehicles and ideally more housing and more dense areas so that we can drive less as well. So all of these things are part of the solution, and we need to do all of them, and we need to do it fast. So with that, I think we can be done.
All right, thank you all so much. I definitely have learned lots of stuff. We will go into our question and our panel. Our first question is for any of our panelists. What would you say is the single most important thing needed in a just transition to renewable energy? And what can individuals in Colorado be doing right now to accelerate this transition?
So I can start and then let the other panelists jump in. It was interesting, that question that jumped out. It's the single most, and I'll be a little bit of an aggravator here, I suppose. It's a system problem, and I think it needs a system. What you saw was it needs a system solution versus the single thing we can do. There's big things we need to do. I think there's 3 or 4 to intervene. And especially, Phoebe, when you say just, because as we're thinking through this and looking at how to intervene in the system, we see that electrification is so important. And yet the GDP just shrank, the most it ever shrank. People are losing jobs. People are becoming home insecure. And how are they going to find the money to do what we need for the future as well? And so I think it's going to be really important as we electrify, how do we create those opportunities, especially for marginalized communities? And that's some of the work that we're doing, and I think it builds on the RMI work. people who will be losing their jobs because they're either stranded assets, whether they're a parking lot attendant and there's no parking lot, or they're working in fossil fuels. How do you transition them to the people who will be installing the electrification and pay for those training programs? So I think we have to look at it from a systems. We absolutely must shut down any remaining coal as fast, however we intervene in that system through advocacy work and the great work of this organization, and then passing the legislation that's needed and get Xcel off of that old financially unviable model into a local distributed renewable model, and to electrify and also to decrease the demand so we're not energy pigs in this state as well. So then I'll let everyone, I'll get off my soapbox now.
Yeah, it's tricky when you add just in there, but I guess one thing that jumps out to me across these, and I love the quote that you showed from David Roberts, Chaz, and this speaks to the strength of the sector. You know, Xcel is the state's largest lobbyist for 5 years running, and they were strong enough to, you know, basically get an exemption from the 2025 GHG reductions in HB 1261. So, you know, what we're seeing, whether it's Black Hills Power or Xcel or banks or other industries, is basically money being sucked out of Colorado, that especially now with the COVID crisis, you know, maybe we could afford to send lots of money to Wall Street, and we could afford to do things the way we did in the past. But now with the COVID crisis and the need for economic recovery, it's, you know, it's time to get a little bit more creative, and it's also more urgent now. So, you know, it turns out that banks can, whether it's a private bank or a public bank like North Dakota, they can borrow money from the Fed at just 1/4%. So this really super tiny amount, which they could then be turn around and invest for like 1% in solar on schools or solar and batteries on everything. And then it's paid off in, let's say, 15 years. And then communities have that as an income stream. And communities are needing to replace income streams, as they've told us, with fossil fuels. So, you know, whether it's banking fees or it's, you know, Xcel wanting 9 to 11% interest on its investment, and it's a monopoly, you know, and that's getting close to 600 million a year going out of state just from that one company that has a monopoly. That's not even Black Hills Power. You know, it's like we can't really afford that anymore. Our communities need that. And we need to make these investments, and in some cases have these things be community owned, because it's a better deal, and it enables us to move more quickly to the total system, you know, transformation. I guess the last thing I would say is 2035 to begin all, you know, 100% electric vehicle sales is just so far, too far into the future. You know, whether we need to shift to new buildings at least being electric and off the gas grid now in the next couple of years, and probably, you know, our electric vehicles too. And when we move this whole thing as a system, like Christopher Clack described, there's huge efficiencies. So that's the easy 75%, and we have to do all of that because the last 25% will be pretty hard.
I'll chime in with two things. One because I failed to be able to post an image in the chat, but I'll try and share my screen. But the first of the question, like what's the one thing that we can do? Well, and this relates to what, you know, the opportunity at hand. Like you know, if we're a little opportunistic, we would say, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that's not to like belittle the difficult times so many Americans and Coloradans are going through, but we need to make sure that the giant stimulus that is coming, and there is one coming, hopefully hopefully from a climate friendly administration in 2021. Like that stimulus package, that is going to be the air that we breathe. That is going to be like whether it sets all of these things that we're talking about, are we running downhill or are we still running uphill, right? So if I had to say one thing that you should do, it would be to, work as hard as you can between now and when that stimulus happens, both in the electoral process and in the advocacy process, so that we make sure that everything there happens. And I'll just briefly share my screen to show what typical Colorado, spring electricity mix looks like. So what this, there's been a lot of conversation, and I think it's a little bit misprioritized in the chat and the conversation about the utilities. It's true that the utilities are a challenge, but coal is continuing to decrease. This is like showing the electricity from 1 week in Colorado. You can see that actually there's a lot of electricity coming from wind and not very much from solar. Coal plays an important role still, and many of the plants here are scheduled to close. And the fossil gas, those are the gas plants, is sort of used to balance the wind and solar and make up the difference. So we're making a lot of progress on electricity. There's still a long ways to go, but we're making much quicker progress on the electricity mix, global or nationally, and especially here in Colorado, than we are on vehicles and buildings. So I think we need to make progress on all of these, but actually the story is pretty positive in electricity as far as the trajectory we're on, whereas I would not say the same thing with the other sectors. So yeah.
Just to clarify around that, because I think we basically agree, Chaz, is the reason the utility transition is important is because it's the biggest piece that can happen really quickly, in a way, because of that great news. But buildings last 100 years, cars last 20 years, and it's going to take a long time to retrofit all these buildings that we have. That's one reason why we don't want to add new fossil fuel buildings to the, keep building those when we don't need to, and we have such good alternatives already available. So,
all right, does anybody else want to answer that question?
Yeah, I really do. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. My name is Alexander Garland, and I'm representing Revis Public Benefit Corporation. Revis is an acronym, REEVAAS. That's Renewable Energy Powered Electric Vehicles as a Service. So our company is designed to set up electric vehicle co-ops and provide micro-mobility and shared mobility services at a mass scale. I shared into the chat some of our promotional videos, and I could share one of those now. It's 2 minutes in length, if that's okay.
Well, Alexander, thank you so much. I think we actually have other questions from the committee that have been prepared, but if you wouldn't mind putting it in the chat again, that would be fantastic.
Sure.
And that way can,
sure. And if I could just conclude, what I wanted to say is, I think the real answer is mass engagement, from the grassroots, bottom up. Waiting for a really organized response from our Congress or from large banking institutions. That's what we've been waiting for 20 years, and time's up.
I think on Alexander's point, I talked about that narrative, and Phoebe, your opening remarks, I think, touched a lot of us, because it's the narrative of a future and a life. And there's things within our control and decisions that we can make to provide the kind of future that we all should have for your grandchildren. And, I think that's a really important narrative. And I think to Alexander's point, creating that narrative, there's a lot of creativity in this country and in this world, and in Colorado, if we're going to start locally, to create that narrative where we can get everyone on board to do their part in that future. That's really important.
Okay, I'm going to go on with the next question. So thank you for all the panelists who answered that question. Can you speak to the environmental consequences of renewable energy? What should we have in mind per advised impacts of renewable energy?
I can speak to it a little bit. So I assume when we say renewable energy, we're mostly talking about wind and solar. I'm not going to lie, like we need to have, maybe 10 or 20 times more wind and solar deployed than we have now. So there's going to be a lot of utility scale wind and solar throughout the country. It will take up some space. There's lots of space, it turns out, in the country. So we've got plenty of space for those solar panels and those wind turbines, but it will take up some space. And so, the ecological impacts will not be zero, though I would argue they are dramatically smaller than the fossil fuel infrastructure that it will be replacing.
I can build on that. Sustainability is an imperfect journey, and you have to make trade-offs. In my last incarnation, where I was head of sustainability for a large hospitality entity, I had to replace a 1 megawatt solar array field to make it a 2 megawatt. And part of it was because of the conditions in which we put up the array. At that point, it was at the 10 to 12 year period. It was in the extreme desert conditions. The array had really lost a lot of its capacity. It took a year to find a place to dispose of those panels. Luckily, we found a place, we shipped them in Texas. But thinking about the life cycle of whether it be a battery or a dying solar panel, I think is important, and it can be solved. But I think that we have to think circularity in this as well. So as part of this, so it can be done, but we have to get away, even in our renewable energy models, away from a take, make, use, waste type of model. And I think we can, and I'm excited to see what will happen, but I still think that there are consequences of it, but they're significantly less bad than if we continued on the current path.
Okay, would any of our other panelists like to answer that question? All right. Our next
Phoebe,
question.
I can't help it. I'm going to share one more screenshot because I always have the right thing ready because I've been doing this for too long. This is there enough land for wind and solar? So this is a nice thing from Bloomberg where it shows how we use land today. So, eating less hamburgers definitely is a good climate strategy, though maybe one that we don't like so much. But the orange box there on the bottom left, if you can see it, it's in New Mexico, or I think it's New Mexico, or Arizona. Like that small box is, if we just covered that section of land with solar, we could literally supply all of the energy that we need, not just electricity. We would have all of the energy we need for everything that we do in the country. So it's not such a small space, but it's a lot less than maybe we use for some other things that we all might decide is not so important.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that. Our next question is, how can we transition to renewable energy and be financed in Colorado?
And Phoebe, if you don't, I'm just going to quickly interject. I just want to say, I know we're just approaching the hour, but I think our panelists were willing to just stay for about 5 minutes extra. So if you do have to hop off, feel free, but thank you for joining us. And then we'd love to hear any answers to this question about the finance. And even in the chat, someone had asked, how are we going to do this when we're dealing with a budget deficit? So I think those are related questions.
I can drop in a link to the Colorado Public Banking Coalition, which is another 350 effort as well. If folks are willing to support the ask there, I mean, this is the closest to free money I've ever seen. So it's a great way to invest.
There is one source of actual free money, and the federal government can print it, and that goes back to the stimulus. That is literally what they're doing right now. They're printing money and they're giving it to us. So when the stimulus package comes out, if it's devoted for clean energy, then yeah, that's the best way to finance it, in my opinion. I think all of these, keeping the money in Colorado and these kinds of ideas, those are all good as well. And so there are ways to make things, more equitable for the communities that are directly impacted. But that stimulus package, that's the elephant, so to speak, in the room.
That's true. If the money can be printed for tax cuts to millionaires or for wars or whatever, they've kind of shown that these investments can be made, and they did that in the New Deal previously, and it really worked out well for the country to make those investments. Especially these things that we're talking about really are investments that generate good returns for the country and our state.
I would just add on to that. I mean, on top of the stimulus, I would say, so that's one great way of financing it. And I think there's creative ways of looking at that. So a lot of people have been looking at like what are shovel-ready projects, but with current deficits, I think it's really about being creative about what you have right now. So is there debt financing that's available to kind of tackle some stranded assets from utilities and provide kind of a reverse carbon pricing mechanism where you're basically saying, if you are willing to start shifting your assets towards clean energy profiles, we will start kind of reducing the debt that you actually owe. Or can we start kind of rethinking how we actually work? Can buildings now be co-working spaces? What does that open in terms of city planning? What about if we kind of start actually only using our vehicles on the weekends because we're working remotely now? What does that kind of set us up, without using any cost right now that's going to make it so much easier to create these sustainable pathways later on and easier adoption for policy in the future?
That's great. An example of what Courtney is talking about, I think, is the new ordinance or regulation they're discussing in Denver around shared housing. So, that's an efficiency. We can, share our houses more easily. And we heard from the other gentleman about, I think, a form of vehicle sharing, and ultimately we need to be able to do this with electricity, and storage.
Great. Well, I know we're just after the hour. I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists and our participants this evening, and also to Phoebe, who really, I just want to give Phoebe another shout out. Phoebe is 12, and I just want to say, Phoebe, you are so inspiring, and just remind us that anybody can take the lead in making something good happen. So thank you for doing that, serving that reminder to all of us tonight. So thank you, Phoebe. And I just want to say, I know we actually had a number of other questions we had hoped to get to, and there were questions in the chat. I want to encourage anyone to email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat, and I will do my best to get answers for all of you who didn't get your answers tonight. So I'm going to do that right now. But Phoebe, do you want to say anything else in closing?
I would just like to thank everyone who came, because this was a long time planning for everyone in the Renewable Energy Committee, and it turned out great, and I definitely have learned many things. So thank you to all of our panelists and all of our participants.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Wish you each a good night. And again, thank you to our panelists.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.